Live from Naples, this is the Morning Break with Jane Ritter.
Morning everyone, a lovely sunny day in Naples. I think the rain has finally stopped. This morning I have a very well-known ELT author, Mark Hancock. We'll be talking about teaching and pronunciation in particular.
Live from Naples, this is the Morning Break with Jane Ritter on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
So as I said this morning, I have a very important guest who will be joining us very soon. Thinking about teaching pronunciation, how often do you incorporate it into your teaching? What activities do you do? And if you're like me, do you shy away from it? Do you shy away from it as I do? Because I'm Australian and I'm a bit worried about my intonation, my pronunciation in general. How do you feel about it? Feel free to join us, and if you have any questions, please do share them with us on the chat or phoning in. Let me tell you a little bit about my guest. As I said, he's a very well-known ELT author and teacher trainer with over 30 years experience in the field. He's taught in Sudan, Brazil, Spain, and the UK. And I still remember the day when pronunciation games landed in our staff room, and we all devoured it. Mark, I've sent you an invite. Please let me know if you can accept it and join. I can't see you as a guest. Anyway, I'll keep going. I'll tell you a little bit more about him. Obviously, his books include Pronunciation Games, English Pronunciation in Use, and his 50 Tips for Teaching Pronunciation. They're all by CUP. He also has a self-published PronPack series, including PronPack Connected Speech for Listeners. He works as a trainer online and on the MA TESOL program at the University of Chester. He's keen on creating art and music and walking in the mountains. Now, I can't see Mark. Let's try again. I've sent another invitation. Please accept it. Okay. Mark, are you there? No. Let's try a little bit. What I think I'll do is I'll just go for a quick break, a quick advertisement break.
This program has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health program will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
And good morning. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Lovely to have you here. I'm sorry about the tech difficulties at the start, but it's wonderful to have you here. Mark, not everybody knows a lot about you, and I know that you've worked in many, many countries. Could you just tell us a little bit about your teaching journey?
Well, I started teaching straight after university by going to Sudan for 1 year. It was more or less voluntary work, and I hadn't got any qualification for teaching, so I don't think I was worth much. But when I came back from there, I got a qualification, my first qualification, and started teaching in Turkey
Wow.
for 2 years, and then moved on to Brazil, 4 years. Each place seemed to be twice as long as the previous place. That seems to be the pattern. And then I ended up in Madrid for a long, long time, more than 20 years.
Wow.
Currently in the UK again, in Chester. So in all of that time, I've been teaching all age groups, all kinds of different scenarios. Also nowadays, a lot of teacher training and writing books as well.
I know quite a lot of your work and enjoy it very, very much. You have a very, very strong interest in teaching pronunciation, along with other areas of teacher training, but people kind of know you as the pronunciation guru. What prompted your interest in that particular area of ELT?
It's strange, isn't it? Because I stumbled into it almost by accident. I was doing some admin hours at the Cultural Inglesa in Rio, Brazil, and they asked me to use these admin hours to make some pronunciation material for their chain of schools. So that was my first interest in pronunciation. I didn't really know much about it before that. But you know how it goes when sometimes your interest comes from doing something, and I got more and more interested in it. And by the end of creating these materials, somebody suggested I should try to get them published, which eventually became pronunciation games, which you mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, I actually used a maze yesterday. With a business client. It was quite, and he was, I love that. You do use a lot of mazes. Is there any particular reason for that?
Well, if I could just explain what a maze is. A maze is where you're going from point A to point B, and you have to find a route through the maze, through the passageways. But you can only go through, in the case of these pronunciation mazes, you can only go through a passageway if the word in that passageway has a certain feature. For example, a certain vowel sound or whatever.
Or
at any point, or stress pattern. At any point in the maze, you're going to be faced with some choices. Do I go left or right or what? And the choices are what's the important point here. You've got to think about which way to go. You're looking at the various options, and you're thinking, well, which one of these words has the feature I'm looking for? And that's what you're after. You're trying to encourage the learner to put some thought into the matter and decide which way to go, in a way which is also motivating as well in its own right, because you've got the big thing, which is trying to get from A to B, a big objective, which so it's much more interesting in my view than simply a list of items 1 to 10, and you have to underline the word that has the given sound. That seems to me to be
it is quite common practice in
boring.
in course books, though. That is one of the main activities, isn't it? Listen and underline or highlight the stress.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, no, mazes are truly engaging. You have sorry, you have a huge selection of pronunciation tips, and I hope to extract a few from you as we're talking today. When you began, or maybe sort of 10 years ago, what were your top 5 pronunciation tips?
I don't know. That's a tricky question because I don't usually think in terms of favorite things. But let me put it this way. I recently wrote a book called 50 Tips for Teaching Pronunciation. Maybe that's where you're getting the idea from the question.
Yeah.
Maybe the idea that I love tips. It was for a series that was being edited by Scott Thornbury, and all of the authors were having to submit a number of tips, 101 tips for this or 50 tips for that. So I organized all the things I wanted to say about pronunciation in the format of these tips. And I organized them into 3 types according to the big questions about teaching pronunciation. The big questions are what, how, and why. What are you teaching? How are you going to teach it? And why are you teaching it? I organized it in that fashion. Now, coming back to your question about how I might have changed in what tips I like, I think it's the third category there, the why tips. These are the ones that I sort of neglected for the first 2/3 of my career, because back in the day, we didn't really ask the question why. When I started on pronunciation stuff, it was all, okay, these are the things you have to deal with: sounds, stress, intonation. Here's how you deal with them. Drills, games, and whatever, different methodologies. But nobody was talking about why. What pronunciation do the students need, and why do they need it? So I think that's where my approach has changed, really, that I've started to regard why as being a fundamental question. That's why I put that question at the beginning of those 50 tips. Yeah.
So why is it important to teach pronunciation, in your view?
Well, it's about access, really. It's to give your students access to a global speech community where the lingua franca is English. I think that's what most students probably need. So when you think of it this way, that kind of goes away from what a lot of people think pronunciation is about. A lot of people seem to think pronunciation is about copying or sounding like somebody else. Like, for example, the Queen, the late Queen. I just give that as an example. It's about sounding like somebody from England or somebody from the United States. A lot of people think that's the whole purpose. It's about mimicking somebody else. And I think that really doesn't cut it, because why would people want that? Very few of them are going to live in Buckingham Palace or United States. Most of them are going to want to use English to communicate with other people, probably also not from those places. This is something that Jennifer Jenkins made very well known, this idea of English as a lingua franca, with her book in the year 2000. And I think that's probably a turning point for many of us in the field of pronunciation teaching.
Wow. So I'm still going to extract some tips. What are the best ways to incorporate pronunciation activities in class? What advice would you give?
Okay, well, you're using the word incorporate, which is interesting, because it is a big problem incorporating pronunciation into your course, because it doesn't usually fit nicely with anything. Let's say you wanted to focus on the pair of sounds in ship and sheep. Let's say you wanted to do that. How does that fit with anything else in the course? It's not like the vocabulary is going to sit nicely with a vocabulary set you're working on. It doesn't fit with any grammar. how are you going to slot that into the syllabus? That's problematic. I have to say it's problematic. So if you want to incorporate pronunciation into your course, you really have to look for opportunities. Here's an opportunity. Take the sentences that you've got. Let's say you're doing a grammar lesson out of your course book, and it has a number of sentences which have the target grammar point in. Course books often begin with maybe a text, and then they go through some questions and then some grammar activities, and then right at the end there might be a small pronunciation thing. How about flipping the whole order of things and starting with pronunciation? If, for example, the activity begins with a text, as many do, you could use that text, you could mine it for pronunciation points. Before you ever start talking about the grammar or the vocabulary, you could really go into the pronunciation so that the thing becomes a live piece of language long before you start trying to analyze it. I think that's the thing about pronunciation. It brings language to life. It embodies it. And so why not use that to make it alive for the students, instead of leaving pronunciation to an afterthought that gets missed off because you run out of time.
I'm working on CELTAs. You do see that happen an awful lot. They don't. That's kind of the last thing to deal with. But actually, in terms of communicative competence, it's probably one of the more important things to focus on, if that makes sense.
It's certainly motivating, I find.
When I obviously, as I mentioned to you, I shy away from focusing on pronunciation. For example, intonation. Being Australian, it doesn't often sit with your standard course books or recordings. It just doesn't kind of work for me. But now I've lost my train of thought. When I do use,
can I come in there?
Yes, please.
No, you mentioned being Australian as if it were problematic, okay, the example of intonation is really good, because obviously intonation is not universal in English. So that's why intonation is so tricky. One of the reasons why it's so tricky to teach is that you look to find a rule, and you find, the rule works nicely for England, but it doesn't work. So it doesn't work in Australia. So, and then you have to ask yourself, well, if it doesn't work, if it only works in one place but not in another, why are we teaching it? And I noticed, coming back to Jennifer Jenkins again, I noticed that she said, well, you shouldn't teach intonation. It's useless and it's unteachable, she said. And I can see a little bit what she means there. And I think the reason being that it's not universal across accents. I appreciate your problem with that. I have the same problem myself.
I have a colleague at uni, and she's Indian English, and her intonation is completely different. We have conversations, but we still understand each other.
Yeah. Well, I noticed one of your activities that you wrote about in the blog for Cambridge. You said, why not just have a single word and get the students to say it as if they're surprised, or as if they're asking a question or making a statement. That kind of approach, I think, is probably the best thing you can do with intonation.
Yeah, I mean, there is obviously good grounds for focusing on it in lessons, because we don't want our students to come across as rude or grumpy when they're...
Sorry, there was a little freeze there, but we're back. Okay. This thing about rude, yes, I think intonation, if you can think of the intonation as two things, one, the ups and downs business. The other thing is where you put the emphasis in sentences. And that, I think, is really important. And one of the problems that people have is not placing the emphasis in a way that matches what they're trying to say. If you put the emphasis in the wrong place, the listener is going to search for a meaning that you didn't intend. And that's really damaging to your intelligibility. So I think it's really important to work on that aspect of intonation. Sometimes it's called sentence stress, sometimes tonic stress, but very important, I think.
Wonderful, wonderful. Where, if it's okay with you, we're just going to take a quick break for the news, and then we will be right back with some more questions.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC features a story on the lack of guidance for teachers and schools on the issue of how to support transgender pupils. The article on the news website highlights the fact that the government first promised guidance for schools in relation to transgender more than 5 years ago, but the Department for Education is only due to publish this term. The piece has been written by the LGBT correspondent and the LGBT producer, and it outlines the difficulty they have had finding schools who are willing to talk about transgender policies, describing it as almost impossible. They say the BBC contacted head teachers across England, but almost all were too anxious to be interviewed on camera, unwilling to draw attention to their schools or pupils who identify as trans or non-binary. Most head teachers who did respond to questions said that without guidance, schools were left to make their own decisions, with some saying this left them in a no-win situation and fearing that whatever they did, they would be criticised or even vilified. One head teacher did say that the schools wanted guidance and advice to help ensure they were making decisions in the best interests of the child. The article also referenced survey tool Teacher Tap, which had asked almost 7,000 teachers about their experiences of supporting transgender pupils. About 8% of primary school teachers said they taught trans or non-binary pupils, compared to 75% of teachers in secondary. Just over half said they were not very or not at all confident about next steps to take if a child said they wanted to change their name, pronouns, or aspects of their appearance. The guidance is expected to address these issues, as well as the issue of how to involve parents if a child wishes to identify as a gender different to their birth sex, and what to do if a parent disagrees. When BBC News spoke to parents, it was also difficult to find a view everyone agrees with, and parents were also reluctant to speak on record. Some told the BBC they did not want any decisions made without their approval, but others wanted schools to put their child's choices first. It is expected that the Department for Education will publish a draft for consultation prior to final guidance being issued, perhaps highlighting how sensitive the issue is. It is likely the guidance will cover legal obligations for single-sex schools and whether schools should inform parents if their child is questioning their gender. It may offer advice on residential trips and single-sex sports. The DfE has said that the overriding principle would be that the well-being and safeguarding of children was paramount. After last week's online storm over the Key Stage 2 SATS reading paper, the content of the test has finally been published. It has been reported across media outlets that children had been in tears, some staff had to really think about the answers, and parents were annoyed at the stress pupils faced, whilst the DfE said the SATS papers were rigorously trialled. The main concerns were over the test's complexity and length, although this spread into debate about the purpose of SATs overall. Details of the test can be found on the Standards and Testing Agency website. In Wales, a plan for 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050 is said to be likely to fail without a substantial increase in teachers speaking the language. This is according to a Welsh Government report which focuses on the drop in the number of Welsh speakers since the census in 2011. The 2021 census also found a decrease in the number of children and young people able to speak the language. The Welsh Government funds training programmes for those who want to learn or improve their Welsh, who are teachers in schools in Wales. Finally, the BBC covers a story on words and phrases the public would like to see banned. It followed a tweet by Countdown's Susie Dent in which she asked which words people would like to see banished from the dictionary. Top of the list was the phrase going forward, followed by the other phrase no disrespect but, the word like when used as a filler word, and the expression I'm not gonna lie. The list also featured my personal bugbear, sentences that begin with so. Dent used it as an opportunity to explore aspects of the English language and how some phrases which seem modern have actually been around for a long time. Details of the full top 10 are available on the BBC News website. So, going forward, I'm not going to lie, this has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm considering how easy it is to get distracted when researching on the internet. I'm putting myself in the shoes of a young person and have set myself a task of writing a report on the greatest invention of all time. I'm also not going to use ChatGPT. So, my first online search shows a lot of people claim the wheel is the greatest invention, and let's face it, there are a lot of them around. There are 9 million bicycles in Beijing, and that's a fact. That's 18 million wheels just on bikes in one city, if we assume nobody has a tricycle. This led me to want to know how many bicycles there are in the world. The answer I found was an estimated 1 billion. That's 2 billion wheels, again assuming nobody has a tricycle. Now I want to know how many wheels are there in the world. Another search tells me there's an estimated 37 billion, 24 of these billion being toys, and the next biggest share of 8.4 billion being on cars. A quick scan of the results page poses an additional question I hadn't considered. Are there more doors or wheels in the world? Well, I simply have to know. In a few clicks I find out it's estimated there are 48 billion doors in the world. So based on this research there are more doors, and isn't a door a great invention? Yet it's not been proposed as one in my prior searches. And if there are that many doors, how many hinges must there be? The amazing thing about the internet is that there's always an answer, and the way search engines deliver those answers are designed to keep you interested and active. So potentially you see more ads and make them more money, which doesn't help get that report written, does it? Does your school teach young people how to research effectively? Do our young people realise how much they are advertised at? I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, why not get in touch at TC Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
And we're back with Mark Hancock. Mark, I was reading, I think, one of your blogs, and you talked about the accent police. Who are the accent police, and should I be frightened of them?
The accent police. The accent police are people who have a rather pedantic view about accent, that this accent is the correct one and those accents are incorrect, and that if you're teaching, you should be teaching towards the correct one, and you should be trying to get rid of the incorrect ones. The accent police are intolerant of accent variation. They think it's an aberration. And the worst thing about the accent police is that all of us have an element of accent police in our own heads. It's like sometimes we are our own worst enemy. And what I mean by that is people who feel that their own accent isn't good enough. They feel embarrassed by their own accent, or in some way inferior. This is really unfortunate, and I don't know. I wanted to try and convince people that they didn't need to feel embarrassed about their accents with that article that you're mentioning. It's you don't have to be the accent police. We should regard accents as nobody has no accent. Start with that. Sometimes, especially in America, in American schools, you have this idea of accent reduction, as if you could reduce it until there's no accent left. And that's a strange view. There's no such thing as no accent.
No.
No.
And it's the same in the UK. We have parts of Australia where people speak in a particular way, and they speak in a slightly different way in other states or towns or countries. You're never going to find the same accent as you travel. But I think I notice a lot of non-native speakers. Often one of the first things they do is they apologize for their English, or they apologize for their accent. And then when they speak, they're clear, entertaining, comprehensible. How can we kind of help people feel better about this?
Well, you certainly you can begin by not making a feature of it, as the accent police do. By not highlighting it as an aberration, by reacting to it to their accent with perfect normality and egalitarian. You could say, well, I say it this way, but you can say it that way. That's fine. People will understand if you say it that way, rather than saying things like "it's pronounced like this" or "we say this." Instead of using phrases like "we say," "we," who are these "we"? Try to be more humble. Let me put it that way. Humble. Instead of responding to students' contribution with, "Oh, no, that's wrong. We say da 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 da." You say, "Oh, well, yeah, you could say it that way. I say it this way. If you say it that way, some people might understand you. Maybe try to be a little bit more humble about it and egalitarian, I think, and remain aware at all times that no accent is superior." John Wells, the phonetician, he wrote once that RP, that standard British accent, is standard not because of any intrinsic superiority. There's nothing better about it. It was just arbitrarily selected because the people that spoke that way happened to be the more powerful people. It's got nothing to do with being more intelligible or superior in any way. So we should bear in mind that standard accents are not intrinsically better.
You mentioned, you described IPA symbols as symbols of power. Is there a link?
There is a link, because in the article you're referring to, I started by saying the IPA phonemic symbols are often used as symbols of power, whereas they should be symbols of empowerment. And what I was driving at was that a lot of people believe that the symbols represent a specific accent, such as RP, received pronunciation. I think that's a confusion, because we have phonetic symbols which are exact sounds, and those can indeed represent specific accents. They have that degree of exactitude about them. But phonemic symbols, as we use them in English language teaching, they represent a system of distinctions, not specific sounds. So there are various ways that each symbol could be said. Take the vowel in duck, D-U-C-K. It could be pronounced duck, 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 duck in a variety of ways, and
Duck.
none of those, yeah, plenty of people say it that way. None of those is superior to any other. It has a range of sounds that correspond to that. And if you use the symbols in this more flexible way, I think they can become empowering, because it doesn't mean that if you don't speak that way yourself in the RP manner, it doesn't mean that you're in any way disqualified.
What happens though when you've got a student and you talk about this, a group of students, you talk about this with them, and then they just say, well, that's just confusing. How they see the teacher as a sort of expert, and they want a clear answer.
Well, it's not. Yeah, there's the answer, and then there's what they end up doing. You could give them a clear answer, couldn't you? But at the end of the day, they're going to say it the way they say it. So the answer is irrelevant. So you could say, well, you can say to your student, speak like me if you like. You can do that. Fine, no problem. But I'm telling you that the way you say it is fine, and don't worry about it. If you want to try and copy me, be my guest, but be aware that the way you say it is perfectly intelligible, and many people say it the way you say it. So I don't know, is that confusing?
No, it's not. It's yeah, I mean, it's going back to your idea of being very humble, and I think I'd like to be your student, because you're very accommodating, and what you say makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Whereas I think you have a sort of very teacher-centered teacher that would have trouble being
teachers
like
sometimes like to wield a bit of power, and teachers I myself have made the same mistake, so I shouldn't preach from too high, but teachers sometimes want to inflict upon their students everything that has been inflicted upon them. So you've gone through the hard work of learning everything that there is to know about, for example, phonology, and then you want to go into the classroom and make sure that the students know everything that you do, that they have to go through all of the pain that you went through. And I think we need to be judicious. You don't have to tell students everything you know. You don't have to convince them that you're an encyclopedic authority on everything. Teach them what's useful to them, what's going to help them, and no more. You don't need to be comprehensive about it.
Wonderful. Tell me about the people who inspire and influence you.
Well, I'm going to go back to early days here. Back when I was in Sudan, I hadn't been training. In fact, in Sudan, I was teaching English as a way to travel, to be honest.
It must have been a fascinating country to work and travel in.
It certainly was. But my motivation wasn't the teaching.
Okay.
And when I came back, and I did a teacher training course with pilgrims in Canterbury, and it was a real eye-opener, because there I realized that the actual language teaching part of it could really be fascinating in its own right. So instead of being teaching to travel, I could flip that into traveling to teach after pilgrims. And one of the principal characters associated with pilgrims was Mario Rinvolucri.
Oh.
Yeah, he wrote books like Grammar Games, for example, which is a book I was very taken with because it seemed to bring excitement to a topic which, on the face of it, looked very dull and grey. So Mario Rimvaluku's influence. Then there were people like Jill Hadfield and Charles Hadfield with their communication games. I really liked, they had these really elaborate communication role play activities with an extra thing where, like a secret that you had to discover by communicating with others in the classroom. You would work towards discovering a certain secret. I always found those fascinating. And then there's Penny Eyre, who I was very much influenced by. She was a combination of imagination, but with a very, very strongly practical, classroom-centered wisdom. I eventually had the privilege of working with her on a course book, but she was an early influence as well.
Wonderful. Yes. Inspirational people. What are your plans for the future? What are your personal or life goals?
Life goals. Now, would it be terrible to say I don't have any?
Yes. No. That's fantastic.
Maybe you've heard that expression, when you've made it, you've had it. If you have a life goal, what happens when you achieve it? You're just going to have to commit suicide, aren't you?
No. Enjoy it.
No, you need to have something that's going to keep you going, and ongoing projects. I think that's what it's all about. Ongoing projects. So I have my ongoing projects. I'm working on a book currently to do with listening, the overlap between listening and pronunciation. I'm working on paintings. I'm going through a phase now of a certain approach to paintings which I hadn't taken before. So that's, I'm working my way through that. These kind of things. So not a great big life goal, you might say, but just little ongoing things that you get involved in.
Going back to the overlap between listening and pronunciation, listening is considered, or listening is a receptive. No. Now I'm confusing myself. Sorry. Teaching pronunciation, is it a productive? It is a productive skill, but there are clear benefits for listening. How are you matching them?
Let me put it this way. I think that pronunciation is hybrid, which means it's crosses between different areas. That's the beauty of it, actually, because on the one hand, it's a system like vocabulary and grammar. Pronunciation, it's a system, one of the three main systems. So it's that, and at the same time, it's skills. So it's obviously speaking skills, but almost more importantly, it's part of the listening skill. I say almost more importantly because it's pronunciation. It gives you access to listening. Listening gives you access to pronunciation too. It becomes a virtuous circle. If you become better at listening, you become better at pronunciation. If you're better at pronunciation, you become better at listening. So you really want to get that circle moving, because once that circle starts moving like a wheel, then the student starts learning for themselves. They become an independent learner. That's what we all want, right?
Yep, definitely. Wonderful. So yeah, obviously clear benefits by working on this. I'd be interested to see what happens, what comes. A fun fact about you.
fun is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? But let me try this one on you. I can draw a map of anywhere in the world from memory.
Really?
And it started when I was a child. I used to read the atlas as a hobby. And when I first went to school, primary school, during the break, I drew a map of Australia on the blackboard. And when the teacher came back into the room, she was astonished. And before that, I hadn't realized it was unusual. I thought everybody could do this.
So you can really just any country in the world?
Well, not just countries. I can do you Baffin Island or, just places. I can't do city street maps necessarily, but territories, coastlines, rivers, mountain ranges, borders, national borders. Yeah.
Fascinating. And you've done this from an early age, so in primary school.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a link between that and your inspiration to travel?
Oh, certainly, yes. I mean, Sudan was my first destination for work, and I was definitely very interested to see what was in this space that the map was showing. It's an empty quarter of the Sahara Desert on the map, a big yellow area with no roads on it. I was very interested in seeing what that was like.
Wow. Do you have a favorite quote?
I'm not really big on favorites, but let me try you with something from Wittgenstein. He said, "Ambition is the death of art." Ambition is the death of art. And what I'm thinking he means here is that you don't create a work of art by setting out to create a work of art. Becoming a work of art is a byproduct. It's about intrinsic motivation, isn't it? I think really great things come of intrinsic motivation. You're interested in something for its own sake. If you become rich and famous as a result, that would be a byproduct. And coming back to teaching, I think intrinsic motivation is the part that interests me most about teaching, trying to make the language and the learning of it intrinsically motivating, rather than relying on things like, oh, pay attention, this is in the exam, for example, which is it's very tempting at times when you have an undisciplined class to bring out the old pay attention, this is in the exam weapon. But if you can get intrinsic motivation on your side, you're going to get a much more enduring and valuable outcome.
Wow, that is wonderful. And I think that's pretty much all we have time for this morning, Mark. Thank you so much for joining, and it's been just wonderful talking with you, and I'd love to be one of your students. You
think I could teach you pronunciation? Is that what you're implying?
Yes, I need some help with my accent.
Yeah, so do I.
Okay. Thanks again, and I'll chat with you again soon, I hope.
All right.
Thanks for coming.
It's very nice meeting you. And thank you for all of your wonderful questions.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.